Hallelujah.
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 We praise and honor to Jehovah God and thank Him for all of our lives and the opportunity to be here this day. You may be seated. We give praise and honor to Jehovah, who is the creator of the heaven and the earth, the one that made all things, the one that is responsible for us being here this day to be able to worship before Him and to praise Him and to honor Him. So we thank Him once again for allowing us this opportunity to reach out to Him in praise. And as we continue to move forward, once again we acknowledge Jehovah as the one that created the heavens and the earth at the beginning of as it is written in the beginning of the Holy Scriptures, and the one who was spoken about, and the one who speaks all throughout the Holy Scriptures, or what is known as the Old Testament. The one who made the children of Israel, the one who changed the name of our father Jacob, Yaakov, to Israel, Yisrael. The one who allowed his children, that allowed his sons, the 12 sons that he had, to be progenitors of 12 tribes, and allowed us to be spread out through the earth today because of the wrongs that we have done, but is giving us the opportunity to return to Him even during this time. For while the world continues to ignore the creator of the heavens and the earth, He has given us the opportunity to acknowledge Him during this time. We're going to go into the book of 2 Chronicles chapter 3 as we are continuing on with our reading of the book of 2 Chronicles. And the chapters that we will go in today will detail the construction of the house of God that King Solomon built. We spoke about this a few weeks ago when we were towards the end of the book of 1 Chronicles, when his father, King David, gave the blueprint, or left the blueprint, left the plans, left the material, left the connections, made wars and peace with those around the land of Israel, so that when King Solomon is going to be able to build this house that we're reading about today, he would have no distractions, no interruptions. So even though King David is not credited as the physical builder of the house of God, he is the quote-unquote mental creator of the house of God. Because King Solomon, all he had to do is wake up, roll over, read the blueprint, contact all of the people because his father, King David, hired out all the contractors. Once again, he got all the materials. He made all the alliances. So King David, once again, is what we would call today the developer, and King Solomon is credited as the builder. Just like in the wilderness, or in the desert, when the children of Israel, when we came out of Egypt, and we came out with all of the gold, the silver, the bronze, and everything from the Egyptians, and the Most High gave Moses the plans on how to build that tabernacle, that tent of meeting, that Moses is credited as the one for constructing it, even though we know it was the works of Bezalel, Aholiab, and various others amongst the nation that put everything together. But we know that that was actually the plan of the Most High that was delivered to Moses. So this house that we're reading about here, although it is not it's not a huge house. We'll go into some of the descriptions of it. It's not a huge house, but it's a very magnificent house. It was a beautiful sight to see. And, coincidentally, and it shows the importance, because once again, once we get into it, we're going to just read about the location, we're going to read about the measurements, we're going to read about the articles that were there at that house. But this house was very important. That's why, once again, during this time that we're observing, this season of Hanukkah, that it was important, regardless of all the wars that the children of Israel were fighting, even though they were led, at that time being led by Judah Maccabee, that the purpose of all of their fighting against the Syrians was to get to the house of God and purify it. So that's, once again, shows how important the house of God is. In the book of Ezekiel, when we read through that, and throughout the latter chapters of Ezekiel, the Most High told Ezekiel that if the children of Yisrael be ashamed of their sins, then reveal to them the pattern of the house. And that's when the description of the house that will be built in the time to come when the children of Israel return to the land. And that pattern was given then. So even though, once again, we also, just to add, we also read in the book of Psalms, chapter 37, also in the song that we sing that, it was mentioned that if I forget Jerusalem, may I cut off my... So it just shows that our focus as a nation was always to that house of God. And so no matter where we find ourselves around the earth, no matter what we find ourselves doing, a house of God is something that should be very important unto us. Now, we cannot construct a house, a temple, put it like that, a temple, in the lands of captivity where there would be offerings presented. But we can have places of worship that are magnificent, that would be attractive in the sight of people, and also be beneficial for the learning and the growth of the children of Israel. Now, this house that we're going to read about, it was a house of worship, but the children of Israel were not able to enter that house. It was only the priests that were actually able to enter into that house. The people were able to enter into the courtyard and see things from the outside, but once again, when we think about a place of worship, we think about a place where we come, worship before the Most High, what we did, sing, praise, and do all of that stuff, but the common person was not able to enter into that house at all. So once again, these are some of the things that we have to consider, but it was important even in the mind of King David that a house would be constructed, and even if he was alive, he himself would not have been able to enter into it. And we can only, once again, assume that King Solomon himself never entered into this house as well. Because once again, this house was only for the priests to do their functions within it and everybody else on the outside. So once again, all the work that was done, when we read chapters prior to this, you have probably close to 100,000 people whose hands were in building this house. It's a lot of people. There was a lot of material that went up as well. Millions of dollars, estimated today as probably $3 billion that it costs to put this house together. So once again, we have to consider, today what we're doing and the mindsets that we should have and the goals that we should have. Because the Most High Jehovah created all things. So he's not gonna, and it was mentioned as well, King Solomon, and even in the prayer, when it's read later on, that he knows that God is not gonna dwell within that house. It's just a place of worship for offerings and incense to go up before him. But it's something that people can marvel at, to know that this is the place that the children of Israel are serving the true and the living God. So as we're going to go into the book of 2 Chronicles, once again, we're going to just read. And as we spoke about in the book of at the beginning of the book of 1 Chronicles, Chronicles overall gives a synopsis of a lot of things, and then in some places it gives you a lot of new information. So there are some things that are omitted, and then there are some things that are expanded upon. So these are some of those chapters where a lot of things are omitted. When you read in 1 Kings chapters 5 through 7 in regards to the construction of the same house, but within the book of 1 Kings, you get more of an elaborate detail of what the house looks like. But you don't get that within these chapters here. I haven't told that. You don't get that because there are going to be things, and once again, just to point it out even before we begin reading, something that may seem minute, but in the book of 1 Kings, it talks about the windows that are in the house of God.
Yeah.
And you never read about those windows here. Not that it's something to think about too long, but just once again, this is only focusing on the actual house itself and not on the courtyard, not on the rooms where the priests would live, not on any of the attachments of the house itself. It just focuses strictly on the house, the building itself. So I know school is also out for many of you, so some of y'all are happy, but we're going to do some math as well, just to keep y'all refreshed. So when y'all go back next month and they ask y'all what do y'all do over the winter break, y'all can say that we did some math. And some people say, well, why do I need to learn the Pythagorean theorem? People complain about things that are taught in school, thinking that you would never need it. but you may come across some point in life where you actually need some of the things that they teach you. So some things may seem mundane as we read through it, but with some arithmetic, a little bit of trig, you can understand everything. So we're going to begin reading in the book of 2 Chronicles chapter 3.
Here's the definition of mundane, lacking interest or excitement, dull.
2 Chronicles, chapter 1?
Chapter 3.
Chapter 3, verse 1. And Shalom began to build the house of Yahuwah at Jerusalem and Mount Moriah, where Yahuwah appeared unto David his father, for which provision had been made in the place of David, in the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite.
And once again, which, if you do remember, at the end of the book of 1 Chronicles, also in the book of Samuel's, this is the location where after King David numbered the people, and then that plague was going forth, and then there was a place where everything stopped, and King David actually purchased this site from, as it's pronounced here, his name is Ornan here, the Jebusite or Ornan, in other places, and he bought this plot of land. And this was adjacent, once again, because you hear about Mount Zion, you hear about the city of David, all of these were adjacent areas up on a mountain. So as we read about the construction of the house of God, it was also in the book of Psalms 125, if I look up to the hills from whence cometh my help, but we know that the house of God was up in the hill, so it's a site that many people seen from various locations that were round about. So it mentioned that King Solomon began to build his house at this location. Continue.
And he began to build in the 2nd day of the 2nd month, in the 4th year of his reign. Now these are the foundations which Shalomo laid for the building of the house of God.
So just pause right there, because once again, we're just going to go back to the previous verse, verse 2. And he began to build in the 2nd day of the 2nd month in the 4th year of his reign. So he had the plans, he had the material, he had the piece. Why did it take close to 4 years for him to start building this house?
Right.
You answer that question?
Yes, I'm asking
Why did it take him 4 years to build?
to start building.
Negligence.
Was the Most High and give him permission to finish it yet?
No, King Solomon.
Or King Solomon?
Yeah.
Maybe y'all ain't giving him. Maybe y'all ain't giving tell him stop. Am I right?
No, he didn't start till the 4th year of his reign.
Oh, okay.
Negligence.
Procrastinating, I'm hearing negligence.
Yeah.
He had to send stones to be cut out in the quarry.
He had to get sentenced.
Timber, he had to get timber and stuff from other lands.
So we're hearing
Take 4 years?
different things.
It took a while.
No, he had to. King Solomon, he definitely had the okay to start to build when he was in power.
To get all the materials he needed from the different places, the gold.
But he had the gold.
Right, okay.
He had the gold.
He didn't have the timber and the stone.
Right. He didn't have the timber and the stones, but he had the gold. He had the silver. He had the brass.
Okay, what else you trick us to say?
Yeah, it actually is a trick question because you're not really gonna get an answer. However, it just lets us know that time does fly very fast. So whether he was procrastinating or not, whether it was him getting the materials together or not, time goes by very fast. January 2023, Beit D.C.B will be in existence for 8 years. Time goes by very fast. And it may seem that, in some instances, a lot of progress is made in some areas. It may seem in some instances that no progress is made. But no matter what, time goes by fast.
So what you like to do for the Jubilee of the 8 years?
That's a whole different question. But it's just to let you know that time goes by fast. We read about in the book of 1 Kings, we read about King Solomon. He prayed to the Most High. The Most High appeared to him in a dream. He had a conversation with the Most High there. He had to judge, remember the situation of the harlots. We don't read about that in the book of 2 Chronicles. There is information in the book of 1 Kings that we don't read here. So once again, there were things that were taking place in those 3-year spans that time just goes by fast. So we could also look at it. It was a trick question, but it just lets us know that time goes by very fast, and sometimes we have to be mindful of that when we have a goal. And once again, King David already laid out all the materials and all of the people that are going to be in charge of everything, but time still goes by fast. King Solomon had to get on the throne. He got to be acclimated to the throne. He had to get acclimated to his position get to know the people, get to know the staff, get to know the populace, travel. Like, we read earlier, Joseph, he had to go out through the land of Egypt to get himself acclimated to the land. So there's a lot of acclimation as well that could take place. But once again, I keep saying that all the time. I say that in other places every time I say once again a lot. However, it took some time for him to get started, whatever the reason is. But not that any of those answers were right or wrong, but it's just to get us thinking that he didn't start till the 4th year. And as we continue reading here, now we're going to get some math going in. Continue in the middle of that verse, and you stop in the middle of that verse.
The length by a cubit after the ancient measure was 60 cubits, and the breadth 20 cubits. And the porch that was before the house, the length of it according to the breadth of the house was 20 cubits, and the height 120. And he overlaid it within with pure gold. And the greater house he covered with cypress wood, which he overlaid with fine gold.
So we see the house itself, as it says here, the length by cubits after the ancient measure was 60 cubits. That's the length of the actual house itself. 60 is how many cubits? 60 cubits. And just to make it easier for you, because an ancient cubit is roughly around 21 inches, but we'll just make it 20 inches just to make it easier for you. So 60 times 20. Second. 1,200 divided by 12. 100, so it's about almost 100 feet long is the house. And the breadth of the house, or the width of the house is 20 cubits, 20 times 20. 400 divided by 12. That's tough for the math teacher, so I know it's going to be difficult for everybody else.
About 36, 37 and a half, something like that.
It's about 100, it's about 100 by 33. That's the size of the house. And once again, it's not, when you think about it, it's not that big. No, it's not a tiny house. 100 by, say roughly 100 by 40. The width of this block might be, from here to there, might be almost 40. It'll be longer going that way, much longer going that way, but from here to here, it's probably about 40. And it was overlaid. When we also read in the book of Kings, it was stone blocks that they would talk about the stones. It also doesn't mention here that there was no tools or hammers heard on the work site. That's mentioned in Kings. It's not mentioned here. But what they did was they had the stones that they put together for the walls of the house, and then on the inside he laid cedar, as it mentions here. It doesn't mention the stones, but there was cedar on the inside, cedar on the outside, cedar wood, like panels here, and then he overlaid that on the outside with gold and on the inside with gold. So now imagine looking up on a hill at midday, and all you see is a glow.
Bling, bling.
That's why when the Babylonians came and they burnt everything and stripped everything, that's why it was such a detriment to the children of Yisrael that thing happened. And when you see pictures or descriptions of the house after that, you don't see gold. All you see is the stones. Like even with Herod, when he built that, what they call, Herod's temple, it was stone. That's why when in the book of Ezra, when there were elders that saw the house in its former glory, they cried because it did not seem exactly like it was before. Because no matter how much repairs they did to the house, they didn't have enough gold to overlay it from the outside. So they did the best that they can. And during this time that we read about, when they repaired the house, they knew what it was supposed to actually look like, but it was never in its former glory. But it reached to the best that they could at that time. So gold within, gold without. It was just a gold house.
How did they take the gold?
How did they?
Take it.
Pulled it.
Yeah, just took it. Pull it,
It's soft.
break it, just break it down. And plus when they burnt the house, that makes it softer. So they were able to just strip the house of all its gold and just leave and the wood would be broken down, because remember the gold is attached directly to the wood, and then the stones on the inside. So actually they probably only had just the stones left, Because when they took stuff, they took the gold probably right on top of the wood as they went forth. Continue.
5. In the greater house he covered with cypress wood, which he overlaid with fine gold. And he wrought thereon palm trees and chains. And he garnished the house with precious stones for beauty. And the gold was the gold of Parvaim.
Which is some places unknown, but they say some people say it's in Yemen, some people say it's actually in the land of Israel, but wherever this gold came from, it was some magnificent special gold that you couldn't really get anywhere. Continue.
He overlaid also the house, the beams, the threshold, and the walls thereof, and the doors thereof with gold. And he graved cherubim on the walls.
So on the walls, on the panels, once again itself, and even within the gold, you would see it. You would see images of the cherubim. You would see images of palm trees, all on the walls inside of the house. Once again, you wouldn't see that unless you were actually a priest. Continue.
And he made the most holy place, the length thereof according to the breadth of the house was 20 cubits, and the breadth thereof was 20 cubits.
So once again, the holy place, or what is known as the Holy of Holies, is the inner chamber of the house. So once again, overall, there it goes once again. Overall, the house is 60 cubits long. The innermost chamber, or the holy place, or the Holy of Holies, is 20 by 20. 20 times 20 is
400.
and divided by 12. Same thing, yeah. So about 33. So that was the width and the breadth of, it was basically a cubicle size. And then within the house, we have these. Continue.
And he overlaid it with fine gold, amounting to 600 talents. And the weight of the nails was 50 shekels of gold. And he overlaid the upper chamber with gold.
So these, the nails that were used within all of the house, the culmination of it was 50 shekels of gold overall. So this was not something that you just went in Home Depot and bought a package of nails. So these, once again, the nails themselves that held things together were actually of gold. So just consider that as well. Continue.
And of the most holy place he made 2 cherubim of image work, and overlaid them with gold. And the wings of the cherubim were 20 cubits long, and the wing of the one cherub was 5 cubits, reaching the wall of the house. And the other wing was likewise 5 cubits, reaching to the wing of the other cherub. And the wing of the other cherub was 5, reaching to the wall of the house. And the other wing was 5 also, joining to the wing of the other cherub. And the wings of these cherubim spread themselves forth 20 cubits, and they stood on their feet with their faces inward.
So once again, at the 2 cherubim, there were images of the cherubim on top of the Ark of the Covenant itself. But within the house itself, they also had 2 cherubim. And it mentioned that the length of their wings in total were 20 cubits, perfectly fitting inside of that chamber. Because once again, the chamber itself, the Holy of Holies, is 20 cubits. So one wing, as it mentions, is 5 cubits from one side of the wing going to the wall, and then the other wing, 5 cubits touching the wing of the other one, and the same thing going to the wall. So that's how you get a perfect. So the people that put this together, even once again, even though we know that King David had the construction in mind, the people that put it together had to be perfect, had to make sure everything is perfect. Because the chamber itself is 20 cubits in length, and then the cherubim, the wings in total had to be 20 cubits to fit exactly into it. So how they did it, we don't know. But that's why King Solomon is credited with being, but even though we know it wasn't him, it was Hiram who was from outside that did a lot of construction and a lot of the work for the people. But just to mention it, when it comes to masonry, talking about not the like brick masonry, but masonry as the
Witchcraft?
field is known as, a lot of people credit it to King Solomon because of the type of construction that had to be done in order for this house to be put together. Continue.
And he made a veil of blue and purple and scarlet and fine twined linen, and wrought cherubim thereon.
So that was a veil, which is basically a curtain which separated the Holy of Holies from the rest of the area. So the length of the house was 60 cubits, which we created to be about 100 feet. The Holy of Holies is 20 by 20. So how long was the outer chamber?
Like 80? Like 80 feet, right?
Right, be about 80 feet because you had 60 cubits minus 20, you have 40 cubits left in length for the outer chamber. Continue.
Also he made before the house 2 pillars of 35 cubits in height, and the capitals that were on the top of each of them was 5 cubits. And he made chains of the sanctuary and put them on the top of the pillars. And he made 100 pomegranates and put them on the chains. And he set up the pillars before the temple, one on the right hand and the other on the left hand, and called of that on the right hand Yachin, and that on the left Boaz.
So as you possibly as you face to the house, the one on the left, which is Boaz, meaning strength is in him. Yachin, which is the one on the right, he will establish. Once again, these are just two pillars were actually before. So you would see these actually from the courtyard. These pillars were just attached or just placed in the front of the house of the Most High. And it mentioned that they're 35 cubits in height. 35 times 20 is
A lot.
times 20. 35. 35 times 20. 35 times 20.
35 times 20.
35 times 20 is 700.
Yeah, 700. We need to see your credentials. We need to see your credentials.
Might not be a match.
Yeah, we need to see your credentials. 700 divided by 12. We need to see your students also.
700 divided by 12.
All right, so about
Verification.
about 58 feet high. Then they had another 5 on top of that, which was actually the capital. Now we're going to get into chapter 4, which is going to repeat a lot of things that were just said in chapter 3. And then we'll go into new moon service. Chapter 4.
Moreover, he made an altar of brass, 20 cubits the length thereof, and 20 cubits the breadth thereof, and 10 cubits the height thereof. He also made a molten
All right, so just to mention, that's the new brazen altar. That's where all the animal sacrifices would be done, as opposed to the one that we read in Exodus, which is 5 cubits by 5 cubits and 3 cubits high. This one is much larger. So a lot of things in the house, it was just larger scale than the tabernacle in the wilderness. This is probably be the last of the math questions, and we're going to read everything so we can continue on. Continue.
Also, he made a molten sea of 10 cubits from brim to brim, around in compass, and the height thereof was 5 cubits, and a line of 30 cubits did compass round about it.
So here's we're going to get the last math question. Actually, no, go ahead.
And under
What
it
was?
was the similitude of oxen, which did compass it round about, for 10 cubits compassing the sea round about.
So it mentioned that this was molten sea, which is basically a big brazen laver or pool of water, as Chief Uzi just mentioned, a big pool. And it says it was 10 cubits from brim to brim. So from this way to that way would be 10 cubits. And when they say brim to brim, what does that note in math?
That's the radius.
From
Diameter.
brim to diameter.
I'm a math teacher.
You said radius first, though.
I was practicing.
So that's the diameter. And round and compass, it says a line of 30 cubits that it compass round about. Does anything seem strange about that?
Wait a minute.
The diameter is 10 cubits.
Mm-hmm.
When you go around the circle, what is that called? Circumference. What is a circumference?
Pi r.
What's the formula for circumference?
That's pi.
No, that's pi. That's pi.
Pi r squared.
Pi, right?
Pi
Pi
r
or
squared.
no?
Pi r squared.
Circumference is
Pi times diameter.
right 2 pi r. 2 pi r. Right. So if the circumference is 10, no, if the diameter is 10, what should the circumference be?
The what?
If the diameter is 10, what should the circumference be?
10 times 10.
No,
10.
So, 31.
30, right. 31.4. So when they say there's 30 in circumference, they're just giving you a roundabout. But just to let you know that all these formulas that you learn in school actually come into play later on in life.
You don't remember them.
Geometry, right, comes into play. Now let's take it to that.
Time shake.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
The oxen were in 2 rows, cast when it was cast. It stood upon 12 oxen, 3 looking toward the north, 3 looking toward the west, 3 looking toward the south, and 3 looking toward the east.
So just mention that the big pool was on top of 12 oxen, but there was 3 and 4 sections of underneath the pool. Continue.
And the sea was set above, and all the hinder parts were inward, and it was a hand's breadth thick, and the brim thereof was wrought like the brim of a cup, like a flower of a lily, and it received and held 3,000 baths.
A lot of water. I won't let y'all do that calculation. It's a lot of water. Okay, at least 16,000 gallons of water. Continue.
He made also 10 lavers, and put 5 on the right hand and 5 on the left to wash in them. Such things as belong to the burnt offerings they wash in them, but the sea was for the priest to wash it.
So these were just like big buckets, as it describes in the Kings. They were on wheels so they could roll these lavers around, and that's where they would wash the animals, utensils, different things, deal with the offerings. But the big pool or the sea, that's where the priests washed themselves. Continue.
And he made 10 menorahs of gold according to the ordinance concerning them. And he set them in the temple, 5 on the right hand and 5 on the left.
So instead of one being in, as it was in the tent of meeting, there were 10 total inside in the house, 5 on each side. For light.
He also made 10 tables and placed them in the temple, 5 on the right hand and 5 on the left hand. And then he made 100 basins of gold. Furthermore, he made a court for the priest, and the great court, and the doors for the court, and overlaid the doors with brass.
So the door leading inside the house itself was made of brass.
And he set a sea on the right side of the house, eastward toward the south. And Huram made a post and shovels.
Pots. Made the pots.
And Huram made the pots and the shovels and the basins. So Huram made an end of doing the work that he wrought for King Shalom in the house of God. The 2 pillars and the bowls and the 2 capitals which were on top of the pillars.
So it's repeating everything that was just mentioned, but it's saying, letting you know that Huram, who was hired out by King Solomon, is the one that made all of these specific items that were placed inside and also on the outside of the house. Continue.
And the 2 networks to cover the 2 bowls of the capitals were on the top of the pillars, and 400 pomegranates for the 2 networks, 2 rows of pomegranates for each network to cover the 2 bowls of the capitals that were upon the top of the pillars. He also made bases and lavers. Made he upon the bases 1 sea and the 12 oxen under it.
Once again, just repeating what we just read. Continue.
The pots also and the shovels and the flesh hooks and all the vessels thereof did Hiram his master craftsman make for King Shlomo for the house of Yahuwah of bright brass.
So bright brass, some books, what does it say? It might have, in that verse 16, what other translations do you have there? Bright brass. Everybody says bright brass? No, that's fine. Some books say burnished brass. Basically, this is brass that was polished very well and refined to it also shone like gold or like basically shine. And only stopping here for a particular purpose and for a particular person. This bright brass, when you look at the word in the Hebrew, marok, which is to purify, cleanse, polish. So Marak El is, once again, cleansed by God or polished by God, shined by God.
Shining.
So his name is in the book. Continue.
In the plain of Jordan did the king cast them, in the clay ground between Sukkot and Zeradah.
So Sukkot is on the eastern side of the Jordan. Zeradah is on the western side of the Jordan, but this entire valley is just like a clay pit. And ancient methods of refining brass, you have to have clay as a foundation. So that's why a lot of this was done. So a lot of things that we read here, when you read historically, you can see why a lot of things took place. Because the methods of doing a lot of these things, it had to make sense. That they had to use the clay, once again, as a foundation. They had to find a clay field in order to make all of these things. Continue.
Thus Shlomo made all the vessels in great abundance, for the weight of the brass could not be found out. And Shlomo made all the vessels that were in the house of God, the golden altar also, and the tables whereon the showbread was, and the menorah with their lamps, that they should burn according to the ordinance before the sanctuary of pure gold, the flowers and the lamps, and the tongs and the gold, and that perfect gold, and the snuff dishes, and the basins, and the pans, and the fire pans of pure gold.
So the same thing as with the tabernacle, all the instruments, all the items outside were of copper or brass, depending on which one you want to think of it as. Most people say copper because that's the time period that they're living in. So On the outside, the altar was copper or brass. The flesh hooks, all of the instruments was of brass. Inside the house, the menorah or the candlesticks were of gold. The tables were overlaid with gold. The snuffers, all the instruments that had to go with the showbread table and the menorah, the candlesticks were all of gold. Continue.
And as for the entry of the house, the inner doors thereof for the most holy place, and the doors of the house, that is, of the temple, were of gold.
So that's where we're stopping. And so you had already a veil separating the holy place from the most holy place, and then there was a door as well. Think of it when you go to a lot of places where they have a Torah scroll in their place, and then when you see that they open up a door first, and then there'll be a curtain inside. So a lot of the patterns of a lot of places of worship are patterned after this house that we read here. So there are a lot of things that may go over a lot of our heads when we go to a lot of places like that, but there are a lot of things that are there that are set based on the pattern of this house that King Solomon built. And that's just one of them right there. Once again, you'll notice that some places you might actually see a reverse where you'll see like they'll move the curtain and then open the doors. And some places you see they open the doors, but it has both. So I guess, once again, and in the Holy of Holies is the Ark of the Covenant, which has the 2 tables of stone within it, which is the 10 Commandments written with the finger of God. So that, once again, in those places of worship where you have the Torah scroll behind that, that's just representing of that written law behind the veil and behind the doors. So once again, we thank the Most High God for our lives. We thank Him for strength, for good health. Thank Him for the season that we are in, reading about the house that was dedicated during this time that the Maccabees and all of the people, children of Yisrael, went to rededicate. So once again, it was very important for the dedication of that house during that time, and it should also be in our minds during this time for the dedication of the house of God. And in lieu of that, in the various places that we scattered in, we have to make sure that we have a place of God so that people can gather, worship before the Most High, and make sure that it's done in beauty and splendor.